So when I first came over to the Foundry, I had the pleasure of working with the founders of SV Big pretty closely, and I have to say that really some of my most helpful and some of my most meaningful phone conversations have been with Bruce. Sorry, I'll pull it up a little higher. Thank you. So Bruce doesn't make it back to campus very often. I have to admit, we're so thrilled to have him here tonight. So it is very much my pleasure to introduce you to him. Bruce Schechter is an active advisor, consultant, or investor in a variety of technology startups, including Life 360, Proformative, Treasury Curve, and Simpler. He's a member of the Band of Angels, Silicon Valley's oldest organized angel investor organization. Bruce began his career at Intel Corporation in 1980, and there he served 17-year tenure in a variety of roles, including fab process engineering, microprocessor product management, the corporate strategy group, and director of online marketing in the corporate marketing group. Bruce was on the founding team of Pendezik, is that correct? LLC, a pioneer e-commerce application service provider, where he served as Director of Operations Management and then Director of Strategic Alliances. Bruce is active in mentoring student entrepreneurs at both Stanford University and Purdue University, and is active in nonprofit work, including his role as founder and president of the Intel Alumni Network, and as co-founder of Purdue SV Big, Silicon Valley Boilermaker Innovation Group. He received a BS in physics and math from Purdue University, where he graduated with highest honors and Phi Beta Kappa, and he received an MS in computer science from Stanford University. Please join me in welcoming Bruce Schechter.
Well, what a lovely intro. Thank you, Julia. So, what a privilege it is for me to be here with you. Let's set a little groundwork and describe the voyage we'll go through over the next hour or so. Four areas I want to cover. First, I'm going to give a preamble, just some thoughts I have on entrepreneurship in general that lead up to the art of fundraising. And then I'm going to talk first about the art of fundraising, because there's a lot of science, a lot of mechanics, but there's, to me, a lot of art that is really, to a large extent, counterintuitive to an entrepreneur that hasn't been there, done that before. Then I'm going to talk about my suggested tool set that you should get in place before you head out on the fundraising endeavor. And finally, I'll just walk through a lot of the content of how I think you should tell your story. By the way, I was amazed when Julia, talked about the ideation process you go through. It sounds like everything you talked about is exactly what I'm going to say here as well. So we're definitely in sync. And now, when I coach entrepreneurs about speaking to venture capital firms, one of the key things I tell them is, I want you to imagine that when you're all done, when the 1 hour meeting you're going to have there that first time is all over, what are they going to remember? You know, like, what are the 3 or 4 bullets that they're going to remember at the end? So I thought, well, I owe it to you to try to do the same thing for my presentation. So there's 4 things that I hope you're going to remember when you go home. I'm going to tell you the bullets now. They probably won't mean anything now, but when I'm done at the end, I hope you could deliver these bullets for me. So first up, it's not about you, it's about them. Second, focus on the angel, not the marble. Third, tell them how they're going to make a fortune. And fourth, investors fund companies, not products. So this will all be much clearer later on. Now, actually, when I've given this talk before, I usually stop and talk about myself. I'm not going to say a lot about myself because Julia did such a great job. I think I will say 2 things about my career at Intel. Well, I'll say maybe three quick things. One is Purdue prepared me unbelievably well to go work for Intel. I graduated from Purdue in 1980. I went straight to Intel in 1980. And then, you know, the old saying of success is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. Well, I showed up at Intel in 1980, and then in 1981 was the year that IBM introduced the original IBM PC with the Intel 8088 microprocessor and the Microsoft MS-DOS operating system. And if you know the history of the computer industry, you know that what happened was IBM did a wonderful job of just handing the keys to the car to Intel and Microsoft, and we made vast fortunes, and they really didn't do well in that world after that. But so I was there right at the right time to watch that whole thing play out. I spent many years in product management for microprocessors and got to travel the world and visit the Hewlett-Packards and Dells and IBMs and Toshibas and such of the world. It was a wonderful learning experience for what I do now. Now later on, I worked in a corporate strategy group where one of the prime things we dealt with was engaging different divisions of the company to do a great job of justifying their existence to the upper management. Andy Grove was CEO at the time, and again, maybe many of you may be young enough that you're not familiar with Andy, but Andy was clearly one of the greatest CEOs in America, and he was definitely the lead, esteemed CEO in Silicon Valley at the time. And we were working with divisions of the company to help them prepare the way that they would give their presentations in funding exercises. I mean, little would I ever have guessed back in those days, this would have been in the early 90s, that I was preparing myself for what I do today. I had no idea, but it was a great preparation. I'm going to not talk about the other nonprofit things I'm involved in. By the way, if anybody does Twitter, I don't know if this is that kind of an audience, this is my Twitter tag. And one warning up front, your mileage may vary. When you go buy a car, the EPA sticker says, well, your mileage may not be exactly what we predict. And I'll have to say that I'm very familiar with how funding happens in Silicon Valley. And I have to be honest, I don't know a lot about how funding happens in the Midwest. And I got to believe that most of the fundamentals are the same, but some of the lingo and some of the, well, you'll see. There are points along the way where I'll do my best to say I'm not sure whether what I'm saying, works well for a VC in Indianapolis or Chicago or such. So I said I would start with a preamble, and my preamble are just some random thoughts. But first, there are entrepreneurial attributes that I'm looking for, and when we in SV Big look for the teams we want to work with, for example, that's not much different than what I think venture firms or angel investors are looking for. And I'm going to talk very briefly about passion, grit, and magnetism. I love quotes. My whole talk is largely a collection of quotes. I love this Steve Jobs quote: "Being the richest man in the cemetery doesn't matter to me. Going to bed at night saying we've done something wonderful, that's what matters to me." And when I look at entrepreneurs, this is one of the key things I look at. Are they just utterly dedicated to what they want to do? And is there a reason they want to do it? The last thing I want is an entrepreneur who says, I want to start a company. I just want to start a company. I'm not sure what I want to do, but I want to start a company. That's not interesting to me. Somebody who has a story about, 15 years ago I was a student, or 15 years ago I was working, and I had this problem, and I just said to myself, someday I'm going to solve this problem. That's the entrepreneur that excites me. And I talked about grit, and I thought Will Smith, he tells this story here that's more of a metaphor that I think nails it well. The only thing that I see that's distinctly different about me is I'm not afraid to die on a treadmill. I would not be outworked, period. You might have more talent than me, you might be smarter than me, you might be sexier than me, but if we get on the treadmill together, there's two things. You're going to get off course, or I'm going to die. It's that simple. And like when we at SV Big, one of our and I think this is a similarity between SV Big picking the teams that we work with and venture firms picking the teams that they're going to fund. We want people, this can't be an experiment for you. It can't be, I wonder if I might be able to do this. I got some spare time, I'll try it. No. We're looking for people who they're willing to put anything that has to be done, because by God, if you really create a company and it thrives, you're going to suffer through some very, very, very difficult times. I mean, if you may be able to find me an example of a company that grew without going through difficult times, but I don't know one, Anyway. And finally, I talked about magnetism. What what we love to see are people that just tend to draw in the world around them, whether that be drawing in other team members to work with them, drawing in customers to want to work with them, whatever. I mean, and by the way, so I've talked about three, passion, grit, and magnetism as this is what we look for. Now, I don't believe that you have to have that innately today. I do think that these are things you should have in mind that you're striving for, because I don't buy that entrepreneurs are born. I mean, to a large extent they may be, but anything is learnable, and these are things I think you should think about. Now, by the way, I'm going to be talking a lot today about the traditional funding venture funding sources, those being angels or venture capital or strategic investors. Strategic investors would be like, when like Intel Corporation, for example, has an arm called Intel Capital. It's one of the biggest venture capital firms in the world, and that would be strategic investment. But those are great funding sources, but really, at the stage that most of you probably are at, you're not even thinking about those yet. You should be thinking about everything but that. Now, that being said, that's not what I'm really here to talk about, because it's not my area of expertise, but I would ask you to strive for every possible way to fund your company other than bringing in equity investors, because if you can do it, you want to avoid it. Of course, you don't want to be giving up share of your company any more than you have to. So, the best possible scenario is customer funding. Customers buy your product from ground zero. I know that, especially in the university environment, government grants are there. There's probably, I know, a fair amount of expertise around Purdue about seeking government grants. And of course, friends and family. Although, friends and family, I will say, I highly recommend not taking money from friends and family until you have like a legal structure in place, and it's got to be clear, because you do not want to be, filing for your IPO 8 years from now and discover now you weren't quite clear on who owned what back when grandma put a $10,000 check in. So make sure you got the legal status proper before you do the friends and family funding. So now, speaking of lingo, and here I would call this good old-fashioned Silicon Valley terminology, probably not too terribly different elsewhere. Typically, the first money in we call friends and family. It's where people maybe a past boss at some job or whatever, they come in, and this kind of a funding round, if it's even not even so much a round at that point, it's just money that comes in, but it could be in the vicinity of $10,000 up to $100,000 maybe. And then you reach seed stage, angel funding or seed stage. And in Silicon Valley, we're in kind of a, they debate, is it a bubble? But I used to think of that as more like a $300,000 to $500,000 round. Nowadays, it's easily up in the $1 million or even $2 million. These could be even angels. There are some very, very wealthy angels out there that can get up to these larger rounds. Series A, I'm calling it 5 million. It could be anywhere from 2 million to 10 million, but and let's talk about just briefly what's typically happening at your company when you would get to these stages. So, the kind of depending on your domain, it can be very different. But let me talk about an IT or internet or SaaS or cloud kind of, the general IT kinds of companies. The expectation is you've got something built that you can put into some, at least evaluating customers' hands, even before that seed stage. By the time you're doing that seed round, you want to have something built, because the thinking is it's so easy to build the darn stuff. You get free tools, you get free hosting up to a certain degree, whatever. So, but on the other hand, I'm not an expert at the life sciences kind of thing, but it's very different there, because at the seed stage, you may have some kind of prototype built. You're probably having to go through all this regulatory activity and what have you. So my description may not be so apt there, but back again to IT. So by the time you get to Series A, the expectation is you've demonstrated quite a bit of customer activity but you're trying to, Series A is going to fund the upcoming progress where you're going to prove the model. You're going to say the sales model we have. We know how to find a customer. We know what it takes to win them over, get them on board, et cetera. And then Series B is just sheer growth. It's like there aren't questions left anymore. There's no question, does it work or not? And there's no question of do we know how to sell it. It just takes a lot of money to do all that selling and sales and marketing activity to grow, and that would be Series B, C, D, E, whatever, depending on how much you're going to need. Now let's imagine, this is pure hypothetical, but imagine 3 of you get together and you decide to form a company, and before you would ever even go out and seek money, very important that you decide your own equity position. So at this point, you definitely have to have a lawyer on board, and you decide, and I'm not saying this is the right distribution, it could be, it's totally up to you, however you want to split it up. I'm saying in this case, the CEO named Ahmet, he's got, what did I say, 40%, Erica, the CTO's got 35%, and Sam, the product guy, has got 25%. So maybe you create 10 million shares of stock of the company, and you split that up, so Ahmet's got 4 million shares at that point. And these are arbitrary numbers. The lawyers can help you decide to set what range you want to set it at. Now, at some point before you're going to go fundraising, you're going to think about how much do we think our company is worth before we raise money. So now that same group comes and, well, they think about we together own a block of this company, the 10 million shares. And this team may think, well, we think we're worth about $1 million before we raise the next round. Now, in reality, in the end, those investors are going to tell you what you're going to be worth. You're going to do your best to argue why you think you are what you are, but it's up to them. And you're either going to like it or not, and you're going to take it or not. But so let's say in this hypothetical case, those investors come in and they say, they do their determination. They decide they agree on that 1 million pre-money. I'm just defining the terms for you here, by the way. That was pre-money. Investors come in, and after all the deliberation, they decide they're going to put in 500,000. And now we just complete the equation. Now to do that, we had to create 5 million new shares, and now there's a bigger pie. And the total pie is now worth, the next day when that check came in, we were worth $1 million before, but now we've got $500,000 more dollars in our bank account. So now we're worth 1.5 million, and that's called post-money valuation. And now those founders own 67% of the company, and you'd have to go back to that previous page and take whatever those shares were, and you're going to dilute them each down by 33%. And now there's, and this will, assuming this company were to go through other fundraising rounds later, the pie is going to keep getting bigger, but everybody's share is shrinking. And the game is, your game, is to build those valuations up very rapidly so that even though your share of the pie is going down, the total amount of money you own, paper money of ownership you have is going up rapidly. Okay, so that's just some basic terminology. And now let's continue our voyage. I want to talk, as I said, about the art side of fundraising. I have to drink a lot when I talk, so talk amongst yourselves for a moment. So yes, fundraising is a science. There's a lot of facts and figures that you're going to have in place. But I would argue, in the end, at least as important is the whole art of storytelling. You don't want to walk in to talk to an investor with just facts and figures, because people are storytellers by nature. We evolved to the species that we are today long before PowerPoint was invented, and in those days we just told stories, and that's how leaders became great leaders, because they could tell great stories. And so, I've I think alluded to this already. I mean, when you get in there with investors, often a great starting point for the conversation is just tell the creation story of your company. What happened? Years ago, John and Sally and I got together, and we were just obsessed with this problem, and that because they're not just investing in their company, they're investing in you. So you want to be a great storyteller. Now, one of those key points that I said at the beginning I want you to remember is it's not about you, it's about them. I mean, your job is to don't just walk in there and tell them, here's the story of my company. You want to be thinking, what are they looking for? What do we know about these people? What makes them tick? And we try to feed to that kind of thing. Now, let's think of a scenario. So this is Sally, the CEO here, and she's talking to some entrepreneurs. And by nature, she's talking to a venture firm here. The three guys on the right are my hypothetical venture firm. Now, by nature, what do entrepreneurs love to talk about? Well, they want to talk about what an amazing product they have, and they want to talk about the amazing technology they have. But what do you think is on the mind of the guys across the table? What are the big questions on their mind?
How much does it work?
Okay, does it work? That's good.
How fast am I going to make money?
Oh, who said that?
How fast can I make money?
How fast can I make money? That's going to be one of my absolute favorite. Yeah. How fast could they get a return? I mean, but
Can the team carry it out?
oh, that's another one of my. I think that's going to be a part of my. Yeah, is she capable of really doing what she claims she's going to do? And I mean, actually, the reality is there's a whole bunch of things. I'm not going to go through all this right here, but entrepreneurs inherently want to talk about their product. They're very proud of their product, and without good coaching, they'll walk into this meeting and probably spend 75% of their time talking about the product. Whereas I would argue you ought to spend about 25% of the time talking about the product. And the rest is all about, do we really know how to grow this company? And that's going to be, we'll talk much more about that later, so I won't harp on it. So there are many book recommendations I would give you if I had time to talk about it. But one of my favorites is a book called Made to Stick. And the authors of this book they studied research on human communication. And the question was, why is it that of all the, on a given day, you hear, God knows how many thousands of sentences, but a week later, there's going to be just a few things that happened today, or just maybe one or two things today that you'll remember. And the question is, why did they stick and what didn't? And part of their discussion of the scenarios are that they use a term that they call the curse of knowledge. So, and it's very relevant to the, like a sales presentation or a venture capital pitch. The idea here is that, okay, let's say you are the CEO of the company, you're standing up in front of some VCs and you're talking about a cloud computing technology that you've built. You know all the terminology around cloud computing, you know all about your particular domain, you know all about your customers, you know all about the problems you're having, you know all of this, but the people across the table don't know a lot about that. And inevitably, you tend to use domain knowledge that they don't, or lingo that they don't maybe quite understand. You make assumptions about that they know how quickly this would grow when you didn't really explain it, et cetera. And you have to, whenever you're talking to investors, you have to question, am I boiling this down as simple as possible? Because I'll tell you, this is my theory. There are people here who do actual venture investments in the room, but my theory is, if it's just not ringing well for them and they're not getting it, they're not necessarily going to tell you that, because why should they bother? They're going to say, oh, this is really interesting, and let's keep in touch. And so it's your job to understand whether they're not understanding or not. And therefore, this is probably the greatest quote in my presentation today is, here's an analogy for you. You know the story of Michelangelo was asked, how did you create that wonderful statue of David, one of the best known sculptures in the world? And his answer was, well, I just saw the angel in the marble and all I had to do was carve it out and set it free. Well, your job is analogous to that. Like you have, the rock in your case is all the knowledge you carry in your head about your startup. And it's all really important knowledge, and it's knowledge that's going to help you grow that company, and that's all wonderful. But there's only a very small part of that that's the story that's going to light up interest of investors. And I'm not saying in any way to be unethical or hold anything back. It's just that there are a few things that matter most, and that's what you should focus on. And the more fluff that comes around it, it's just going to take you off purpose. So, and by the way, the kind of things that Julia talked about in the ideation process guide you to the kind of things that really matter most. So, and we'll come back to that in a minute. And finally, I may be telling you things you know well, but know your audience. Like every investor, well, especially in the venture side, angels is maybe a little harder to get good information on them, but you should learn. You just can't go wrong of study before you get there to understand what their interests are, and are you a good fit for them, or are you maybe an okay fit, and do they have invested in companies that look somehow like yours? All these things are going to make you resonate. The more you understand that, the more you can resonate well with them. And I just thought of a story. One of my companies, who I won't mention by name, I did an introduction to them a couple of weeks ago to a venture partner that I know, and honestly, I made the mistake that I hadn't looked carefully at their website, where these are bullets that are literally lifted off their website that say, this is their investment thesis. And my company is a very sheer profit-driven corporate finance. It's technology for corporate finance. And I didn't read the bottom line here, but double bottom line, for those of you who know, that means that they want not only to make money off their investment, but they want to see it helping the world and doing greatness for society. Well, there's nothing about our product that we're selling into corporate treasury that's going to make anything but money for us all. So, it's just not, it wasn't a good fit, but it's important to know that before you waste their time, and then better to just move on to something that really makes sense. Okay, so let's talk about the basic armaments. Would anybody be so kind as to bring me a Diet Coke? I'm drinking. So the armaments that you have to prepare for fundraising. First off, you know the term, the elevator pitch. So to me, elevator pitch, thank you very much. It's something that fits preferably in a paragraph. It's something that I could even leave on a voicemail. And the elevator pitch, I would argue that, the old story is, let's say you got on the elevator with somebody really important that might write a check, and you're going to tell them before you get up to the 5th floor what you want to say. But often it's not so much can you say it, it's whether all the people around you can say it. Because take me, for example, I serve in many advisory roles for companies, and I know a lot of people in venture. So I'm constantly doing these connections between my entrepreneurs and my friends in venture. And the question is, can I get it in there? Now, I don't understand it near as well as my CEOs do. So it's got to be boiled down simple. And you should practice it. It should just roll off of your tongue. And everybody in your team, because they also might find access to some investor by some sheer coincidence, and all of the advisors around your company, they should all be armed with this elevator pitch. Then an executive summary, and we're going to come back to talking about that one-pager, like the thing that we want you to fill out for SV Big is precisely the kind of executive summary you ought to have for fundraising. And then the executive summary and the elevator pitch and the executive summary, to me, are the tools that just get the door opened, get your foot in the door to get in there and actually talk to somebody. So then, once you can get in there and actually talk to somebody, whether that would be talking to an individual sitting at a Starbucks, or whether you're standing in the venture capital firm doing your pitch, whatever, the PowerPoint deck is what you're going to use for those in-person meetings. And then further, when you get finally way down the path, you're going to have a detailed financial pro forma and lots of due diligence materials, which are much more than we're going to have time to talk about here. But those are the basic armaments. Now, so let's talk about, I'm going to talk about how to tell your story in the form of those armaments. So first, an elevator pitch. Just for fun, I wrote, this is purely hypothetical. This is a made-up company. But my scenario here, is that the CEO of the company asks me to do an introduction to a venture capital partner that I know. And so when I do these introductions, I literally, I mean, it would not be out of the question that I might spend a half an hour thinking about one paragraph that I'm going to send. Because I'm thinking, something's going to have to light them up. You know, something. These guys get, 100 of these a day. I mean, something's got to light them up and make them think, this is the company that I really care about. And you never know for sure, but you do your best. So let me read you what I said. Hi, Ted. Hope you're doing well and that the golf game is looking good. Please allow me to introduce you to a company called Flextro Tech Sciences, which is currently starting human trials on a new device which promises to cut the cost of knee replacement surgery by 60% and increase resulting ambulatory responsiveness by 30%. They have several medical supply distribution partners already prepared to ink deals upon completion of the trials. Their CEO previously ran sales at Medtronic, and their CTO is a UPenn trained MD. Might I follow up with an executive summary, or better yet, give you a verbal update by phone? So, I'll just say a little bit about my thought process when I wrote this. Like, number one, you notice I didn't talk about the product. I didn't really say what it is or how it works. All I said was kind of in terms of business metrics, why do you care? Because we'll worry about, who cares what the product is? It's just like, what's the end result that makes it interesting? Like, in terms of some kind of metrics, my 60% and 30% numbers. Saying anything you can about proof points on go-to-market are super important. Like, I'll say this probably 10 times in the next half hour, but when companies fail, they usually fail because of go-to-market. They don't fail because the product wasn't good enough, whatever. It's like you can't acquire customers fast enough. So I'm trying to say, what can I say in a super brief point that would say, we know something about our ability to get to market, and therefore I talked about that we have distribution. We're really early in the game, but we have distribution partners already teed up. And something like the fact that I said their CTO is a UPenn trained MD. Well, the reason I would have said that was I'm going to look up that partner and see where he went to school. I'm going to find somebody at that company who went to that school. I mean, we play this game all the time. People are very proud of the school. You guys know this because you're in a school. But people are very proud of the schools they come from. So anyway, those are some of my thinking. And the art form here is, if in journalism, this old saying is don't bury the lead. The trick is to find out what the lead is. What's the thing? And I would say you're probably the last person to really judge it. Yes. Let me come back in just a second. But you have to kind of be constantly, you want to tell this story to anybody who will listen, because you're learning over time what lights up interest with people. And there were lots of facts and figures about that company that I might have pulled from, and over time I'm trying to learn, what are the things that catch their eye and get them interested.
I was going to ask about the last slide. When you were sending that email, how important is it to give a background of the problem statement or whatever? I think a lot of companies, even in executive summaries, they'll spend a good portion talking about that.
No, that's a great point. And by the way, I don't go follow the format of my, because it would be everything's very specific to the company. I'm a huge fan of stating a problem statement. When it's knee replacement, I just figure, everybody knows we need good knee replacement, but in reality, I probably should have alluded to some advantage over competition now that you mention it. If I could fit that into my one paragraph, I would. Given that I made all this up and I know nothing about knee replacement, you'll have to cut me some slack. So anyway, yeah. So over time, it's your job to figure out what that lead is and then lead with it. Now, moving forward to executive summary, I'm a big believer in the short form, like one page. In the old days, like 5 years ago, people used to write, like these 5-page documents. These days, if you write a 5-page document, nobody will read that. I guarantee you, nobody will read it because everybody's too busy. There's too many opportunities out there. So keep it down to one page, as the great mathematician and physicist Pascal said. I would have written a shorter letter, but I didn't have time. So your job is to take the time to boil it down. So I'm going to make this quick. Let's see. By the way, this is anecdotally true for me. When I get executive summaries all the time. And if it's one page, I'll read it on my screen. I try to read it the minute it arrives because then I just get done with it. But if it's 2 or more pages, my immediate reaction is I'm send it off to the printer because I can't comprehend that much on the screen at once. And you know what happens when it goes to the printer? It's never seen again. It's like at the end of the month, I throw everything out of the printer away because I just don't read anything that I print. People don't buy what they don't understand. I mean, it's just like sales. You know, your job, you've got to, I'm being repetitive here, I know, but you've got to learn what people understand and what they don't understand. And the only way you do that is you got to draw feedback out. You're going to get, it's like we were talking with Jessica about this earlier here, that you're probably going to get 10 to 20 rejections before you get the investment, if you're doing well, by the way. But your job is to understand when somebody rejects you, you got to do anything you can do to try to figure out what went wrong. You know, and people, they don't typically tell you unless you learn how to draw it out of them. Because investors, they love to be the happy, nice people that say, you know, they don't want to piss you off because you might go invent the better thing later, and then they are going to want to invest in you. So what they're going to say is, this is really interesting, let's stay in touch, you know, this is intriguing, you know, tell me when you've gotten further along. And then you've learned nothing if you just take it at that point. You've got to understand what was the difference between them not writing the check today and them having written the check today. And then when you figure out what it was, you go fix it. You go change the story. Or you literally fix something. I mean, you might have to go back and literally change the product or change the go-to-market strategy. But you can't accept not learning from the experience. And you got to make sure they are going to be able to understand it next time. Investors don't fund products, they fund businesses. I think I've made that point super well already. And maximize repeatability. So here's my theory, that when somebody reads that thing, like most any investor, except an occasional very high net worth individual, most any investor, whether they're an angel or whether they're a partner in a VC firm, they're never going to make that decision alone. They're going to go compare with colleagues. So you're getting your executive summary into their hands, they're going to read it, and then they're going to go talk to their colleagues. Now the question is, are you arming them in ways that they're, you know, is it simple, clarity, easy enough to repeat that, and make sure that the things that matter most are clear? So your whole job is to prepare them to go tell their friends. And so, you know, it goes back to the kind of like my obsession around not being too technical or not being too data intensive. You know, if you're giving some big technical spiel to them, they're not going to be able to repeat it anyway. So, I mean, save it for later, and when you can do, you know, you're in the second big meeting, whatever, but keep to down to what really matters in the short form. There's a simple concept I'm trying to say here. Whether it be in a PowerPoint presentation or the executive summary, do not make the mistake of talking about some wonderful attributes of your company or product until you've fundamentally defined what the product is. I see this all the time, especially in presentations, and it just kills me. Somebody's standing up there saying, it's amazing, we've acquired customers and the product is very high quality, works like a charm, customers love it, and you're sitting there thinking, what does this mean to me? I don't even know what the product is. So tell me what the product is first, even if it's a one-liner. That may be good enough. If you say it's a cloud computing solution that allows calculations of IRS funding, blah, blah, whatever. If you just told me in one line, then you can go do the positive attributes of your company. Now, to me, the ideal executive summary is exactly the one that you'll see in the preferred format for the SV Big application. Probably not a big surprise because those of us at SV Big defined what that application is. And there are the following bullets are the things we want covered in this short form. It sounds incredibly similar, if not identical, to the lunchbox process. Did I say that right? Good. So I mean, you have available to you here at Purdue great coaching on how to build such a thing. So I'm just going to try to go as fast as I can through every one of those bullets and just, you know, wax poetic about what I think you should be covering as you go through each of those bullets. So going back to whichever, I think it was your question about problem solution. You know, I absolutely, if you can't define a problem that you're solving, I'm probably not going to be interested in your solution to go with it. So, clarity of pain. The question is there a way that you can, if you state that there is a pain existing in the market, the question is how do you clarify credibility to that? And like examples would be, okay, let me make this point. So we'd like to see must have, not like to have. I mean, in other words, it can't be just a casual problem that, some people sometimes have this problem. It's like the best problem are ones where people know they have the problem. They don't have to be trained to know they have the problem. Yes, tangible evidence. Has somebody somewhere done a study to show that this problem exists, or any kind of data? So it's not just your opinion that this problem is out there, but something to because I might not know. It may be a domain I'm not a real expert at. So you're going to have to prove to me that that problem exists. And then, of course, once you've defined the problem and then you've defined your solution, make darn sure that your statement of it's very brief in this executive summary, but make sure that the solution really does circle back and make it very clear how you've solved the pain. And my repeated term throughout this presentation is punchy and repeatable. Make sure that you've explained it in a way that once I've read it there, when I meet a friend 2 days later and I say, oh my God, I read about this startup and it's really interesting, I need to be able to repeat what you said. So your job is to prepare me for that. Okay, market opportunity. The kind of, to me, two preferable metrics that we're talking about here is some total market that defines very broadly what is the opportunity, and then in the near term, what's really available to you. Now, these are kind of debatable depending on your particular scenario, but to me, like available means like with what we have or are going to have really soon, is it really available to us? It's just kind of really ruins your credibility if you walk in and you say, well, there's 500 what is it? I think $500 billion worth of restaurant sales in America, I think it is, and then you've got some individual food product you're selling, and then you told me the available market is 500 billion. Well, no, that's not all available to you because you're not going to, your individual food product's not going to, and this happens all the time. I mean, people do this without thinking about it. I mean, not as egregious as my example, but make darn sure that you're clear what really is available to you based on some assumption. Yes, if it's, ideally it's third-party data. If it's like in the IT space, if you could say the Gartner group said, or I forget all the names of these firms that do the market assessments, somebody's data, maybe from some press source, sometimes you don't have it. And the only way you can do it is just make some wild-ass assumptions. And if that's what you got to do, you do it, and you walk in there, and you be bold, and you say, we've done our analysis, this is what we think. And this goes to one of my theories about CEOs. The CEO is the prime spokesman when you go in and talk to investors, and you are the expert. If you're not the expert, then nobody's the expert. So be the expert, and even if you're not sure, just pretend as well as you can. And if they say, and if that was a scientific term I used, by the way, wild ass guess, but if they want to challenge you on it, you boldly tell them exactly what your assumptions were. We couldn't find any raw data available, so this is how we did the back of the envelope and came up with it. And you stand there confidently and say, do you have better data? We'd love it. Bring it on. But don't be shy. It's like one of my greatest bosses at Intel Corporation is still my prime mentor in life, and he would always say, I may be wrong, but I'm not uncertain. You might be able to find analogous products in the marketplace that you can reference. They may be selling into a similar market but different. They may even be a competitor, but these are great ways to do market sizing. This, my overused phrase, this is one thing you really have to remember. But when you talk about market opportunity, my absolute favorite is the narrative equation for market sizing. And it could be something like, let's say maybe you're selling a subscription-based mobile app to families of America. So you would say, well, there are 100 million households in America, and when we sell a subscription, we sell it for $10. And so the available market to us in the US alone is $billion. $1 billion. Now I should have had my math ready. Sorry, I invented it on the fly. But the point is, you reel off that equation, and nobody will forget that. That is very memorable. It's very crisp. So now the alternative is you could go through, 5 minutes of analysis and get to the same, with much more data and get to the same conclusion, but somebody might not have remembered it so well if you didn't just spoon feed them that beautiful little equation. Now some companies have very, more complex business models, and you might not be able to do this, but if you can do it, it's criminal if you don't. Okay, competition. Be definitely open and honest. If there are clear competitors out there, you don't want to stand there and describe competition and then have them go home and do their homework and come back the next day and say, why didn't you mention this competitor? That's really bad for your... Investors are very smart people. They're going to figure it out pretty quickly if you don't tell them. So you want to be ahead of the game. You want to tell them up front. And you already said this. Brilliant minds think alike, by the way. So yeah, that's the worst thing you could ever say is we really don't have competition. Everybody has some kind of competition. It's just a question of what's the next closest thing to what you're doing. And you know what's really funny? I get executive summaries, and it's often because I've given some coaching to a company, and I say, why don't you use this format, because I find it works really well. And they come to the competition section, and then they just list 5 competitors and say how strong each of those 5 competitors are. And then they move on to some other topic in their executive summary. And I'm thinking, wow, why would you tell me you have 5 strong competitors and not say a word about how you're going to beat the heck out of them? So the competition section of your executive summary, even though it's titled competition, it's all about you and your company. And it's how you beat those competitors that are out there. So don't make that mistake. Business model, obviously this is how do we make money? Who buys what from whom, for what price, how often? It's like one thing I find about the really good venture guys and women are that they are business mechanics. They will look at your company, and it's amazing how fast their minds work. They'll just start to boil it down. Let's see, there's this many customers and this many segment, and you could price at this level, and on a monthly basis. They're just building spreadsheets in their mind in real time. It's amazing. So you've got to feed them the right assumptions so that mental spreadsheet that they're building in their mind is going to look very positive for you. So just give them the basics. And it's got to all fit together. Your business model has to, typically you'll have done market sizing before you get to the business model. So you've kind of set here's how many customers there are out there, and then you talk about the business model of who pays what, and then eventually you're going to talk about revenue projections, and all those numbers have to kind of flow together because they all fit together. The revenue projections are the end result of how big is the market, what is your pricing, and your assumptions are on pricing, and then that predicts the revenue. So it's all got to fit together, and your job is to tell it in a way that it feels like it all fits together. Yeah, business model to me is all about unit economics. Start with individual transactions. Whatever a transaction is, you define that. And because that's something that's unarguable. You say, my price is $20 a month per seat. Nobody can argue with that. Now, we'll argue all day about how fast can we acquire more customers, but at least this is kind of the anchor that leads to the broader question that becomes more controversial on other assumptions. Yeah, it's a little hard to explain in the abstract, but very often you will be describing your company and there may be other partners involved. It's not just you selling directly to a customer. There's often other partners or other constituents in the ecosystem involved. And if that's true, you really have to struggle here to be darn clear like where do the boundaries of your company end and then where do the beginnings of other companies? Otherwise you can leave a kind of a confusing mess. I wish I could think of a good example, but in the interest of time I won't try to do that. Do you all, yes?
Are you thinking of the distribution, for example, when you get the company and you get distributed, maybe a certain procedure, maybe a rental, maybe not? And is that what you're speaking of?
That would be a perfect example.
At what point does that become a critical part to your business plan? In other words, if you're in seed stage and you're basically trying to get an angel investor, is that the same need as it would be when you go into VC when you're trying to raise for the second round of funding for production?
Well, you're asking a very broad question. I was just referring to the simple fact that, I mean, taking your example, if there's distribution, which on any kind of physical product there is, and then, you know, make sure that when you talk about business model, you may talk about the, you know, the list price in the store. Well, then of course when you talk about your revenue later on, it's you know, you're only taking a fraction of that. So just make sure those kind of things are clear. Because you may talk about a price, and the question is, which price are you talking about? Is it the price out your door or the price out their door? Yeah. So now I want to talk a little bit about go-to-market, but do many of you know who Dave McClure is, of this famous 500 Startups fame? I have the honor of knowing Dave fairly well. We did an investment together back before he even called his company 500 Startups, and he's the funniest guy, just the absolute funniest guy. And before I talk about my theory of go-to-market strategy, I thought he described it all perfectly well here. Top 3 reasons our startup failed. We didn't sell anything, we didn't sell anything, we didn't sell anything. I mean, I just can't emphasize it enough. You know, when you're in the early stage and you haven't really formally sold yet, you have a big challenge to convince investors that you know how to sell this thing, because you don't know how to sell the thing yet. So, with that precursor, I have a philosophy. I call it think big, start small. So when you talk about go-to-market, you're going to want to tell a little bit of your time kind of the grand visionary thing of, you know, eventually we're going to have broad distribution through XYZ, you know, distribution partners. But meanwhile, you're sitting here, you know, you've barely talked to any customers, and you know that's great to have as a vision. But now the question is, what are you going to do tomorrow? What are you going to do a month from now, et cetera? So that's the think small, and you need to tell kind of both sides of that equation. And I call this the big dog, just because, I mean, if there's one section of your story that matters most, I believe this is it. It depends upon your company, but in general, this is true. You know, I'm not going to talk a lot about this stuff, but I just want to emphasize this last idea. Put a lot of focus on the near term with real specificity. You might tell a story like, you know, typically, like you might, even in an executive summary, you might be able to do kind of a 3-phase thing. You would say, right now, we're doing direct sales. We're just picking up the phone and getting to people we know who can get us into any company we can get into and having a good conversation. It's guerrilla tactic. That's what we're doing right now. Now, next, we're going to open up online sales for our company. We're going to sell through our website because that's easy to do. It's low cost to get started. And then it'll complement our direct sales, because direct sales would maybe move them over into this online sales. Then, you know, a year from now, we're laying the groundwork right now, but we're going to go to the Apple Store and we're going to go to Best Buy. And so you walk that through, and you're saying, you know, if you had just started by saying, well, we're going to sell through the Apple Store and Best Buy, everybody's going to say, yeah, right, let me know how that goes, you know. So, but if you tell it as a timeline, you could build the credibility to believe you know how to get there. And we have in our prescribed format an optional section at the bottom that we call progress and milestones. A lot of times the discussion you've had up to this point is already described where do you stand and what are your key milestones. But if you think it hasn't been hit hard enough, you know, it's nice to brag about well-known things that have already happened. So, you know, we got this patent filed, or, you know, real customer did real evaluation, or we sold 100,000 units, whatever it is. These can be very tangible. But then you start you start predicting milestones, because this is a big part of fundraising. Is like, you know, the guy who might write your check to fund you for the next year one of the biggest things on their mind is what are you going to be able to achieve in that year? Because at the end of that year, you're going to go out looking for more money. And we want to do some amazing things in that year so that the valuation's up, so that everybody's happy when the next round comes in. Because the last thing you want to do is go out and raise money a year later at the same valuation you did just now. Then everybody's not really happy campers then. Yeah, oh, by the way, product and technology milestones, slightly interesting here. Overwhelmingly, we want customer or revenue-oriented milestones. Things that go to the bottom line of business. Traction is the watchword, anything that shows traction. Okay, team, everybody needs a title. I have another book recommendation. It's called, what is it called? Oh, you'll have to ask me later, but Harvard professor did this great study, and they compared startup founders and what were these startup founders willing to decide really early on in their company, and then how did that correlate against great success later? What they found was if you were very clear, very near the beginning on what titles did each of the players in the team have and what was the equity distribution, there was very high correlation towards success. And he said, he knows the correlation is there. He couldn't be sure why it's there, but his hypothesis was being willing to make these kind of decisions early shows that you have great leadership skills, that you're going to be willing to make fast decisions on imperfect data, because that's what running an early stage company is all about, making very difficult decisions based on very imperfect data. Anyway, give everybody a title. Evidence of done it before. You're not going to be able to write a resume for everybody in a brief form. You have an executive summary. But if anybody's worked for Microsoft, even if it was a frickin' 3-week internship, you're putting Microsoft on there. Whatever. Get some. I think that's my next bullet. Oh no. But yeah, name brands are helpful. Anything that you can say that they accomplished in very short order is very helpful. If you have advisors of any kind that carry any kind of credibility or, again, brand name because of some company they were with, fantastic. I mean, ideally, they're an advisor that people even recognize their name, but very few people are lucky enough to have those kind of things. But these are all helping with credibility. Oh, just some fun things not to do in an executive summary. I think, Julia, when you talked about filling out the SV Big template, just use the format. Don't try to be really fancy with graphics or whatever. I just want words. Just tell me the narrative as if you were talking it to me. The fun graphics and such you can do in your PowerPoint deck later. And I've beat this to death, but do not use, and I'll tell you, this happens to me all the time. I open up an executive summary. Right there in the first paragraph is a word that I have no idea what it means. I'm a moderately smart guy. I do not want to have to go Google things to find out, yeah, no tiny fonts. Oh, this is a funny thing. People do this is controversy. I'm going to give you my opinion. They'll show revenue line and they'll say year one, 100,000, year two, 1 million, whatever. And I'm thinking, well, what's year one? When's year one start? And then their answer is always, oh, well, this is post-funding. And I say, it's back to my theory about CEOs are certain. You're going to have your own assumption about when the funding's going to happen. You may be wrong, and you'll have to go back and change this 6 months from now. So change it 6 months from now. But I want to know what's happening in 2014, what's happening in 2015, and not in year one and year two. Hopefully I made my point well there. Oh, and this is another one of my favorite things. Is saying, we hope we'll do this, or we intend to do such. No. We will do this. We absolutely will do that. Okay. Now, I've talked about how you're going to learn from you're going to constantly learn by learning where the pushback is coming, and then you learn to improve the story. But before you even go out to investors, you want to learn from anybody you can. Your team ought to be well trained in this, so they ought to be even though if you're the CEO and you're the one that's going to be the voice of the company, you want the entire team bought in. You want their feedback because they're smart people. They wouldn't have been there if they weren't on your team. And they wouldn't have been there if they weren't smart. So let's make sure they all buy in, because they also may be able to help get the message out as well. And then you go out more broadly. I mean, I say this only half jokingly, you go to your parents. And the reason I say it is you want to make sure that this is something that anybody can understand. I don't know how many times I've heard friends of mine in venture firms say, you know, they say, you know, if my mother can't understand it, then I don't think it's been boiled down simple enough. And, you know, Glenn and I were debating whether I should be alluding to mothers, but versus parents in general. But since they said mothers, I'm saying mothers. But seriously, I mean, this has got to be really, really easy to understand. Friends, you know, preferably, you know, more maybe closer to your domain. Okay, now we're getting serious. So now your advisors got to be bought in, because they, you know, more often than not, or I would say maybe half of the time, route to investors comes from advisors. So the advisors better be really bought into the way you're telling the story. Now we're going to go off first to the investors that we don't care about as much. You know, the ones that maybe we've, you know, typically for any fundraising process, we'll do a Google Doc, everybody involved. We'll have a list of, you know, 40 firms that we might try to go after. Everybody says, who knows somebody at that company, blah, blah, blah. And then, but we'll decide which are the ones that are least likely to invest. And we're going to go there first, because we want to practice the story, learn how it goes. And when they say no, we're not as disappointed. We're always disappointed, but we're not as disappointed. But we're watching for that pushback. And you have to drag it out of them. You know, try to glean from the questions, the look on their face when they're questioning you, you know, where the problem is that then you're gonna go home after that meeting. And I'll tell you, here's another philosophy. Do not be the entrepreneurs that go out to an investor meeting and do the pitch, and then the investor says, oh, you know, this, you know, oh, that was great, but, you know, we'll keep in, you know, this is probably not for us right now, but let's keep in touch. Do not go home and sit there and laugh and say, boy, those guys were idiots. You know, they just really didn't get it. Do not do it. People do this all the time. Do not do that. You go home and you say, what did we do wrong? How could we have done that right? You know, what could we possibly have done differently to win those guys over? So, and if you have that mentality, you know, you're going to up your chances of success by about 50%. And finally, you go to the for the win investors. Now the deck, I'm not going to say much about this because it's the same story. You know, your deck is really the same story you put into your executive summary, but the same topics. You just put it in a very simple PowerPoint. You know, keep it short and sweet. I think, yeah. So, yeah, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. You know, go back to that, you know, angel in the rock analogy. You know, if you have 30 pages in your deck and it takes an hour to present it, it's way too much. And now you got to decide, where was that angel? You know, just carve out what is, and part of this is iterative, because you're going to go do the presentation, you see where they're sleeping and where they're excited, and you focus more on where they're excited. If you're not already familiar with it, there's a classic blog post Guy Kawasaki did many years ago. He calls it the 10-20-30 rule, and I think this is generally right. So you should, for a typical VC meeting, you should have 10 slides, 20 minutes, with no questions. You can get through this comfortably in 20 minutes, and no font less than 30-point font. And you should have very few words on your pages, because this happens to me when we have our Band of Angels meetings once a month. You're sitting there listening to these entrepreneurs, they're talking really fast, and sometimes they'll put up these pages with a whole bunch of words on them, and they're talking intensely about something really important. And you're sitting there thinking, well, am I going to read that slide or am I going to listen to that guy? Well, you don't want to be in the position of forcing them to make that decision. So very few words on a page are more like just kind of a guide to keep the flow going. They're not to convey a whole lot of information, because you want to be the exciting thing, not your deck. That's easy to Google and find. So the last thing you want to do in your presentation is something like, you may have seen this as a joking PowerPoint slide borrowed from the US government. This is the last thing you want to do, but instead, my hero absolutely is Steve Jobs, or was my hero. And And if you haven't, most of you probably done this before, but if you haven't looked at some of his great product rollout presentations, go look at them and think about what do you learn from that for your presentation style with investors. He will typically have, there's very few words on a page, there's very little on a page, just imagery. And the imagery goes with storytelling. And he's making a lot of the same kinds of points that you would need to make in an investor presentation. But it's all about him. It's all about him and his narrative. The slides are just very subtle in the background, and they kind of keep the pace going. And to the extent that there are diagrams and charts, they have to be there. But when it's just words, don't try to tell the story in the PowerPoint deck. Tell it in your own verbiage. So now I'm going to see if the 4 things that I hoped that you would get out of my presentation, let's see if I covered them well. So it's not about you, it's about them. I'm sure you've gotten the point. You do all the research you can before you get there. You make sure that you understand their interest and feed figure out what they're looking for and make sure you're giving it to them. Focus on the angel, not the marble. So you got the picture. You're going to pare the story down to whatever really lights up the interest. Tell them how they're going to make a fortune. I probably haven't really spent as much time as I should on that. I mean, it's really easy to talk for 20 minutes and forget to explain, that's what they're going to be doing in their mind. How could I imagine that this could become a $100 million, $400 million company and that would have a positive exit? Debatable whether you really want to talk about an exit in a first meeting, but anything you can tell them that leads them to the conclusion of how they're going to make a fortune is what matters. And investors fund companies, not products. I think we've made that glaringly clear. So, hey, I do have one small favor, something you could do for me. If you enjoyed what I said to you, go to my website there and click on the Facebook. If you're a Facebook user, click on the Facebook I'd be thrilled with that. And if you have any comments on Twitter, that would be fine as well. And if you have any burning questions for SV Big, you can reach us through this alias. So, wow, I really talked overtime, didn't I?
We started a little late. Just a little.
So, any questions? Any questions, and Glenn's going to answer them. Yes?
The question, if I may, for the video, the question is, how can you tell that an investor is very interested in your product?
Well, I mean, you won't know until you explain your product whether they're interested in your product, but you can know. There's the 2 best things you can do are, number 1, go read, like I said, on their website. Any VC firm is going to talk. They may not be real clear, but they'll at least give you some information about the domains that they're interested in, or they might talk about attributes of entrepreneurs that they're looking for. But also you go look at what companies they've invested in, and you find out you can try to glean from that maybe a little detective work on what kind of things that they like. Yes?
If you're working with an advisory board that has more accreditations than you do, if you're working with an advisory board that has more accreditations than the founders, like their PhDs, doctorates, or graduate students, A, how much do you look into the advisory board, and B, how much do you want them to be involved?
Well, gosh, let me think how to be short on that, because that's a whole topic in and of itself. But I think advisory board is a wonderful thing. I mean, just in the same way that we at SV Big work with these companies, it's the same thing, but it's broader because it's a long-standing relationship, whereas we're on a 6-month period when we do it. But first of all, you want the best, what was your term, accreditation? I can't say that word, but so you want the best credentials you could possibly get, and don't apologize that they're better than yours. That's what you want. You want people 10x more qualified than you are to be on your advisory board. That's why they're there. Because if you already know this stuff, you don't need them. The companies that I advise, I tell them to aim for 10 people. Very few ever get that many. I'll tell them, okay, do it on a 1-year vesting schedule. You drop some shares, very few, because most of these people are doing it just because they want to do it. You drop shares, vest it for 1 year, and you get as many as you can, at least 5, maybe 10. And then at the end of the year, the 80-20 rule comes into play. You discover that there's 1 or 2, maybe 3 were super valuable. You keep them on. You don't mention to the other guys that they've been dropped off the list. And then you go out, because by a year later, you're much more credible. You probably can aim even higher to get, and you're looking for really maybe stating the obvious, but you're looking for 2 different things. One, you're looking for real help. Like you want diversity. Like one of your advisory board members may be just phenomenal. Maybe he was VP of sales somewhere and is going to really help you with your sales strategy. One may be a product domain expert that's going to help you with your product development process. One may be, better at fundraising. You're going to help you there. And you get this diversity. And then so you want so I said there's 2 things. One is their help. The other is credibility. Like when I look through executive summaries, often that's one of the first things I go look at. I see who they have on their advisory board and what kind of credibility do they bring. Because now I know, it's like social proof. If that guy signed up to be on their advisory board, they must not be total idiots, So, did that answer your question?
That's good. So you talked a little bit about how you talked a little bit about how for that seed round of funding, your valuation is sort of like whatever the investors tell you it is.
Oh no! At all rounds of funding,
Well, sure, but I mean, you have to be like once you have revenue on in the B round or whatever, you can fight back.
No, that's
a
true.
bit.
No, you're right. I actually don't have that much expertise out on those later rounds. They become just pure financial transactions. Right. They're like accounting rules that can just determine.
I guess one of my my question is for people who have something especially hard to value, like a website or something that has users, but not a lot yet, or they sell some things, but it's harder to value. Is that something that SV Big works with people on to try to determine before they go into that seed round of funding what evaluation they should be shooting for is, and how to try to get a better valuation or push back against a low valuation buying investor?
I'm going to first answer kind of philosophically, and then we might be able to come back and actually try to answer your question. But my mentality is rather than worry a lot about how you think, what you think your valuation is, just worry about telling a phenomenal story when you get in there. And in fact, if you go into the first meeting with an investor and they say, well, what are your expectations around valuation? My opinion, which is controversial, but my opinion, you say, look, I don't want to talk about that right now. We haven't really got to know each other well. But we need to teach you a lot about this company, and then you'll decide whether you want to go with it, and then we'll make that determination. And the reason we do this is because the typical process is you're going to go through many meetings. And every meeting means they must be happier and happier, or they would have cut you off by then. And so every meeting, the potential valuation's going up because they're happier and happier because they've learned more and more. So you want to push that out as far as you can. But in the end, they're going to throw down a term sheet and they're going to say, we're offering you X at this valuation. And then you're either going to take it if you think it's okay, or you're going to argue with them. And and no matter what you had in your mind before you got there, it didn't matter. I just think you ought to have something in mind, not because you're going to tell them that this is the valuation. It's just you're prepared that if what they offer you isn't high enough, you're going to argue the point. Now, there are people here who could probably, I don't know, Glenn, would you?
I'm in total lockstep with that. It's like sales. You don't typically close the deal on your first sales call. And so the more they're bought into you being the right company, the higher the valuation you're going to get. And Bruce and I are from the same school. Never put your valuation on your one-page exec summary.
No. Yeah, unfortunately, the angel groups, which I happen to be a part of one, they kind of try to force you to do that. I think it's criminal. It's sad. They want you to say valuation, expectation, and how much are you trying to raise. And those are the 2 questions that I don't even want to answer on my first meeting with somebody. I'm just there to tell them this is the most amazing company you have ever seen and walk the face of the earth. And later on, we'll come back and talk about those things once you're convinced that this is the most amazing company that walked the earth. If you open with those numbers, now you'll never go higher. You'll never talk them up from there. They may push you way down. They also may think you're an idiot because you asked for too much or too little. I mean, all you've done is open up things that can go wrong for you. But unfortunately, these angel groups tend to push you into it and you don't have a choice. So.
Hi. How about for those of us who have full-time jobs, and like you said, you were initially employed at Intel, and then you left there. And incidentally, I'm about to start at Intel, and I have a great idea.
Oh,
for a
good for
company.
you.
Thank you. And I'm thinking at some point I will have to give that up to go full-time. So my question is, what are your metrics for saying, hey, you know what? It's time that I leave this company. It's time I leave my full-time 9-to-5 job and just dedicate 100%.
Boy, that's a hard one. And well, first of all, good for you if you can find enough time to do it in your spare time, because having a paycheck is a really nice thing. And the further you can go before you have to give up the paycheck. By the way, you better make sure all the legal issues with like an Intel I don't know how that's going to work. You should be fine, but don't do it in secret. That would not be a good thing. So let me think how to answer that. I mean, you go as far as you can. My experience is, like in the Silicon Valley ecosystem, it's quite common to you may have 5 people starting the company. CEO in the early days is the only one that goes off in the wild, gives up his job, dedicates his life. And it's wonderful for him or her to have all the other people have a day job, because they're not panic-stricken the whole time or whatever. And then one by one, they can move over, and you give strong equity preference for the people who are willing to take the risk early, and that's just the way it is. I mean, you're asking a tough question, and I don't know if there's any magic answer. But keep the paycheck as long as you can. But you're facing the fact that us investors sit there and think, oh, wait, he's got a day job. I'm not sure he's really all in. So I mean, so.
Hey, Bruce. How does the pitch change, if at all, when you're not just seeking capital, but you're also seeking a potential corporate partnership? And if that's the case, does it ever make sense to pin potential corporate partners against each other, or make it seem more competitive, like you
absolutely.
have other?
I mean, anytime. I mean, that doesn't. You want to pin people against each other any way you can. You want to pin investors against each other if you can. You want to pin partners against. I mean, if you're lucky enough to have that option, please do it. Wait, but what was your original question? It was like, well, I think I'm going to ask Glenn to answer this one. All I can say is just build the value of the company the same way you would have a discussion of, problem solution. We got a great team. All of that is important for a partner, just like it is an investor. So there's a lot of the same story, but I don't know. Any thoughts about partners?
So a strategic partner is always going to give you a higher value than a venture capitalist will. So if you can get your money from strategic partners, I mean, it's twofold better, because one, they'll give you a better value, but obviously if they're going to invest in you, they're committed to you and your product. And so then when you go for the next round of funding, I mean, how good is it to walk in and say, not only is this company a strategic partner, but they invested, $2 million in our A round or our B round. So, I mean, it just boosts the credibility off the charts.
Another question.
Hi. So companies that sell to businesses, such as like business to business, it usually takes a long time to acquire a customer. So sometimes the customers, you'll be talking to them, they will give you a letter of support and so on. How credible is the letter of support? And if it is good, what should go into the letter of support? What do investors usually look for? Thanks.
Well, I agree. Anything that gives real customer feedback into the investor system is a wonderful thing. I don't know. I mean, it sounds like you know the kind of the cogs in the machine. You know, the further along the customer is, the more credible the letter is going to be, and the more commitment they'll state. Like, you know, it would be one thing to say we are. You know, the basic would be we're committed to evaluate the product. You know, we're going to try it. That'd be far better than no letter, but it's nowhere close to as valuable as a letter that says, we've made a decision, we're going to buy $1 million worth of product. I mean, there's light years difference. So you just push the bar up as high as you could get.
Or even better, if they bought $1 million.
Yeah, that's, well, thank you.
First customers for everything.
Yes, no, that's a great point.
Yeah, I have two quick questions. First, whenever you look at VC funds or these fields, it's all about the innovation. And based on your experience, is the innovation the only way to go to attract VCs? And the second question is it all about the money, or VCs can also help you to direct you in some ways? And
Yeah, great question. Well, you know, innovation, of course, that's a very broad word subject to a lot of interpretation, but absolutely. I mean, if there is a fundamental technological innovation that nobody else has done, and if you can tie it to real customer pain that you really solve, and you have evidence that they really want it, I mean, you can't beat that. It's like, yeah, I mean, a fundamental differentiation you have that nobody else could provide, killer, wonderful. I mean, it's kind of a step further, is they love to see what they call a category killer. Now, innovation isn't necessarily that. I mean, the classic VC lingo in Silicon Valley is, like, there's only one Intel in microprocessors. There's only one Google in search. There's only one Facebook in social networking. There's only, whatever. And there was 20 companies trying to do all of those things and only one won. Now, the question is, your innovation, is there a way to tie it to the belief that you're going to be the winner? Especially if you got a patent protection. Yeah.
The one caveat to that is there's Silicon Valley is littered with companies that had innovation and were too early to the market. And so you can be so far out ahead of the market. And I did a startup that we were literally 3 years ahead of the market. And one of the things when Bruce and Juliana talked about, I have no competition, that's a case that scares VCs. If they do the research and there is no competition, then you're into what we call missionary sales. And missionary sales means you got to have a lot of money to last a really long time to either get the product to the market or get the market to believe that there is a problem and that it is a solution.
Mm-hmm. Now, your other question was, do they help outside of just giving you the money? And I find there's a lot of controversy on that point. I mean, the VCs that I know well and I believe in, and I bring companies there as often as I can, I've seen plenty of evidence of how they help. But I mean, there are war stories abound about venture firms that made an investment, and especially when things don't go so well, they can be very tough on the company, and in the end, it's their investment's all that matters. They don't care a thing about you, they care about their investment. So, I mean, but all that being said, I find they can be tremendously valuable. I mean, especially the bigger, well-established firms, they can have substantial hiring capability. They know so many people, their Rolodexes are so deep that when it's time to hire your VP of sales or whatever, they can be very helpful, and just help with, how to prioritize. I heard Mark Andreessen talk at an event at Stanford not long ago, and I just thought it was, it's vaguely relevant to your question, but he said, somebody asked him, what was the biggest surprise being a VC? And he said, I spend probably bigger than any other issue I deal with people issues. It's like, in other words, there's some drama going on inside of one of his portfolio companies, and so-and-so's thinking about quitting and going to that other company or whatever, and he goes in and acts as a father figure and tries to make everybody happy, and he said, I was so surprised that I would spend my time that way. But there's an example of him being very helpful to these companies if you can take him at his word.
From your experience,
I'm sorry, Bruce, could you repeat the question?
Are they more in,
From your experience, to go to a VC, if you haven't passed the FDA, but you've had pilot study, are they not interested?
you know, I've never been involved in a company that needed FDA approval, so I can't speak very intelligently about that. I'm an IT guy. It's a good question. I'm sure they care about it. I just don't know how it's prioritized. Yeah, that's a good. Yeah.
What did you say for life science that you should at least have clinical interest? Maybe a clinician, partner or something? Somebody who's going to use the product.
Well, yeah, yeah. I don't know how, like we at the Band of Angels do a lot of funding of med tech things, but it's a separate set of people. It's funny to even think about VCs for those kind of companies though, because often what I see is they just get them, they do this angel funding, maybe some pretty stout angel funding, and they get past approval. As soon as that happens, they're bought up by, you know, Medtronic or whatever. So there's not even a VC involved. I'm completely out of my league to talk about this. I just don't know.
Could you talk about corporate ventures? I have been like, I kind of understand the venture capitalist thing. The corporate venture seems to be a new one, and what exactly they are looking for, and sometimes it takes a long time to get an answer from them, and it doesn't look like the same things they are looking for like a venture capitalist. Could you please explain?
Yeah, you know, for me personally, the only corporate venture capital organization that I've ever done business with is Intel Capital, just because I tend to know a lot of people there. And they are, on one hand, they do their best to think just like a VC firm in terms of the kind of the whole financial model they play, but there's just the additional angle that they have strategic interests. So at any point in time, there's some corporate objectives that they're trying to support. It's very broadly defined though. I mean, like I don't know, I mean, these days the company's so different than the company I worked for 15 years ago that I can't really say. But you want to understand what the company's mission is, because if you can show how you're supporting the company's mission and you're a good investment opportunity, you're in great shape. So, and today, my understanding is it's gone crazy. I mean, like the number of kind of, you know, when Intel Capital was formed, there was no such thing as this was like 1991 or something like that. There was no other big company out there doing this. Now, I mean, apparently like, you know, brands like Sara Lee are doing this kind of thing, you know, like it's just crazy. But I guess the simple answer is find their strategic interest, and you know their financial interests are going to be the same as everybody else's. They want to put in X dollars and make a high return on it. You know, there's no rocket science there. You know?
Well, please join me in thanking Bruce for coming out today. And
Thank you.